Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site is Jim Lewis, Head of Technology, STP Investment Services, Carlo Di Florio, Global Advisor Leader at ACA Group, Ben Turner, Founder and CEO of Verituity, and Chinmoy Bhatiya, Executive Director at Capco. We're here to discuss the impact of AI innovation on data governance and how to implement best practices across the enterprise. Gentlemen, it's great to have all of you with us, certainly a topic that is near and dear to Trade Talks. Jim, let's kick it off with you. Give us a brief introduction to the company and your approach to data governance.
Absolutely, yeah. STP is an outsourcing partner for investment managers. We provide services and then technology platforms. And one of the key things that we have to deal with is we're dealing with so many different investment managers, both the managers' data from what they're trading, how they're trading, but also their investors. Statements, contract notes, things like that we have to produce. So data's key. You know, we have to get it right for our clients, for our vendors, but also for STP and our own reputation. So our approach is to look at where can we automate data? How do we make sure we manage data one time, use it many, so we're not constantly moving data around or manipulating data. And then the big thing too is making sure that we're curating data and creating data. So when we can bring data together that we have both sourced, but also bring it in from the outside and bring it together and make it transparent to our clients is critical. And what our goal is to make sure that not only are we transparent with our data, but we made our data very accessible. Let our clients use it the way they need to. But again, it all starts with the data being correct or else pretty much irrelevant.
Right. And Carlo, tell us about ACA Group and how you think of data governance and risk management.
Thanks, Jill. So ACA Group similarly works with financial firms, and we help them launch, grow, and protect their businesses, primarily through consulting, outsourcing, and technology solutions that strengthen their governance, their risk management, and their regulatory compliance.
Right. And Verituity, Ben?
Yeah, so what Verituity does is we focus on enabling what we call B2B and B2C verified payments or payouts for banks and enterprises. And what that does is it puts data at the core of our business because we focus on capturing, verifying, and understanding the data that informs the flow of funds. So for us, data governance isn't just about protecting the data, it's about having the transparency around understanding what that data is doing and how we're using it and what it is.
Yeah, that seems to be the theme, Chinmoy, right? You know, when you think about Capco and transparency, it's kind of all down to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Capco, as a global consulting firm on management, technology, and data governance, is certainly helping our clients all over the world deal with new realities, such as those brought on by AI and generative AI in particular. Absolutely, transparency is the key, especially with AI-driven decision-making and things like that. Being able to explain what is being done behind the surface or under the surface with AI solutions becomes very critical. The approach that Capco takes for our clients is focus on people, process, and technology, of course, but with the mindset of enabling business objectives and keeping a continuous improvement approach towards data governance. It's not something that can be one and done because the regulatory landscape, business pressures, and the technology landscape now is evolving so quickly.
Well, let's talk about that some more, Chinmoy. Why does data governance matter so much now? Is it just because regulators are taking more notice of it, just because there's just so much data? I mean, shouldn't governance consistently be a practice?
Yeah, I don't think that data governance is anything particularly new. It has been around as long as data has been around, and data is certainly the lifeblood of modern organizations. With the use of data for automated decision making and for AI systems that automate operational processes and so on, there's more of a focus on the appropriate and responsible use of data, making sure it's secure, making sure it's accounted for and accurate. And as a result of that, there's additional regulatory oversight for data governance. It is certainly beneficial, even without the regulatory governance, for organizations to keep a track of their data assets throughout the life cycle, all the way from identification, ingestion, to sourcing and usage. Just because it can be such a big competitive advantage, and misuse can get you in all kinds of trouble.
Yeah, Jim and Carlo, I'd like you to follow up on Jim's answer as well, because you're both in financial services. But Jim, I think part of the challenge is that everybody wants to be first to go to market when it comes to whether it's a new AI technology or a new data service that they have for their clients. But sometimes being first to go there doesn't necessarily mean that the appropriate governance or risk management is being looked at first before these products roll out.
Agreed. We were talking about this earlier a little bit, and I'll focus on some of that Chinmoy said too. Is it's moving so quickly, and there's new folks coming into the thing. There's new tooling. There's new ways of doing it, and I think some folks are going out and purchasing software and throwing it at it, and it's a solution to a problem that maybe not even exists yet. But I think the folks that take the time to really design and have a strategic implementation, they're the ones that are going to succeed. And that takes a little longer, so maybe you don't get the monetization as quickly, but it gives you a better product. And I think the key of that is that you have to have your data right. Ben and I were talking about this earlier. You have to have your data right before any of that matters, because you place something on top of it, garbage in, garbage out, as they all say. And I think that's the critical first step in producing something that's going to be viable.
I would agree with that, Jill. And you asked, why it matters. Similar to what Chinmoy was saying, information is power and data is information. And so it can help businesses achieve strategic objectives, have strategic advantage, really succeed. But also they need to be really careful, to your point, around the governance and risk management. And so we come at it at ACA from a perspective of, how are you thinking about data governance through cybersecurity, operational resilience, information and privacy? And how do you make sure that your data is protected and protecting your customers, your employees, and other key stakeholders, so that you can seize the opportunities but manage the
Right, and
risks?
I'm sure it's a big concern with Verituity as well. I mean, you're processing transactions.
Yeah, so one of our biggest concerns is, how do we protect the data? But equally important is we fundamentally believe that the individual or business owns their data. So how do you provide that transparency and that control without limiting what you're trying to do with data to power your business? And so data governance isn't just about meeting regulatory constraints. It's about meeting contractual constraints from your customers. It's about delivering on the promise that individuals and businesses own their data, but also framing that in a way that allows you to do what you're going to deliver in business. And for us, it's the promise you can trust your payouts.
Right. Well, and you brought up cybersecurity. Is the tech stack too big in a way, or are there too many vendors that are involved? Because you said the businesses own their data.
So I think that the answer is no, the tech stack's not too big. What is true is if you try to assemble 100 vendors into your own tech stack, it's too big. So the trick is, how do you get the right set of tools that you can effectively manage? But most importantly, how do you build the culture around how you operate those tools, how you handle your data, how you reflect to your customers? What's our approach to protecting your data and building trust that our models are delivering the results you want?
And that's a really good point too, is the tech stack being so big and wanting to keep that ecosystem constrained, picking the right tooling. It's the hardest thing, especially when we're moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. And there's a new player on the market almost every week, it feels like, and making that right decision to keep your stack, manageable, to be honest with you. But yet, if you pick the wrong player, you could be out of the market pretty quickly. So I think it's a really tough, it's a lot of decision making that needs to be made, and that's where the strategy, I think, comes in, and having that design concept up front of not only how you're going to implement these things, but what are you going to do once it's implemented? Because then there's a lot of metadata that comes out of these things that you have to also manage as well.
Well, and I think that's a big part of data governance now. It's not just the data you're collecting, it's the data you're creating, right? So our business uses a lot of machine learning and AI to drive payments. The data that we collect is important, but the most important thing are those derivatives that we're creating. And how do you protect that? Who owns those? And what are your rights to use those in other workflows?
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things that I think is really different about AI today is that we've traditionally dealt with structured data. And now with generative AI, we're moving into unstructured data. And I know with our technology solutions, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to leverage AI to be able to get at that unstructured data. But that's the future, and it's going to proliferate data and the need for data governance.
With the advent of generative AI, it tends to be non-deterministic in the output. So you can never predict exactly what you're going to get from a generative AI model, which adds a whole bunch of complexity into the traditional data governance approaches.
Yeah, so there's a couple things here. Carlo, you made a great point that don't create a problem that doesn't exist. Like, build your tech stack based on problems that your clients are looking for you to solve. And it's interesting what you said about generative AI, just in my rudimentary knowledge of using it, one platform to the other, one, you ask questions, the other one, like I was using Gemini the other day and kind of figuring it out. And in the tutorial, it's like, tell me what to do. Don't ask me. And it's interesting to see how they build the output, one model versus the other. So.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, we see a lot of different strategies for ensuring roughly the right response from different models. One technique that we use a lot in our own experiments at Capco is something called an orchestrator model, where you wrap the outputs of a couple of different AIs inside another AI that evaluates all of their responses and then gives you a consistent response. So that's something that certainly could be applied. Trying to do that at scale is relatively experimental, and that's where it's an emerging field.
Yeah,
That's so interesting too.
like synthesizing AI.
Yeah, it's because the AI platforms they're not commodity solutions, but they're becoming like a commodity solution. It's what you put in and what you get out. That's the value add, right? Like that's really what we're trying to all basically get to.
And the hard problem in that is how do you create the training data that gives you the answer? So you use one model, you use another, you get two different answers. Yeah. That's because the training data was different. So how do you make sure that you're using the right training data to fit the context of the problem you're trying to solve, right? So for payments, it really matters that you're using the right set of payment data versus some other.
I think the challenge for me is it could be subjective. What I consider responsible and ethical might be a different threshold for you, Chinmoy. And I think that's kind of, it's a concern, right? Because not only do you have hallucinations, right, but then it could just be misinformation, and we have enough of that. So how do you standardize that?
Yeah, it's not easy, of course. There's a lot of different techniques. There's technical guardrails that you can implement in your interactions with large language models and AI models to ensure that when you detect hallucinations, they're being handled appropriately. I think the point that is very interesting to me is standardization, the word that you mentioned. That's what the regulators are trying to go for as well, trying to figure out a standard set of rules or a standard set of guidelines that everyone utilizing AI can leverage to ensure responsible use. And it's extremely difficult to do that. So what most of the regulatory bodies that are pursuing regulations around AI are doing is aligning to principles, the top level principles that may be aligned to human values, such as transparency, mitigation of bias, open access to the information underneath, and so on. And as a result of that, the downstream regulations are going to be pretty consistent as long as you align to the responsible AI usage principles upstream of that.
Yeah.
And one of those interesting principles is explainability. Yeah. And I think that's going to be so important from a regulatory and business perspective. Can you explain why you're comfortable that your AI is reliable, right? And the SEC recently conducted a sweep and visited firms and said, how are you governing and managing AI? And what they're really looking for is, have you thought through an authorized use policy? Do you have a governance committee that owns accountability for this? Do you have model validation around inputs and outputs in AI? And how are you making sure, to your point, Jill, that the uses are ethical, right? So how are you reviewing the use cases? And I think that's going to open up a whole new, interesting, exciting, but also risky if you don't handle it well, realm.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry.
And one of the challenges is it's a different framework for business to business applications than it is for consumer applications. Yeah. So in business to business applications, you're looking, how do you build that feedback loop? But how do you regulate that? You really can't, because every business is unique.
Well, I mean, you also have different regions that you're operating in, but, and this is something that I struggle with when we think about global regulation, whether it's digital assets, content moderation, AI, data privacy. Fundamentally, we approach legislation in a very different way. I mean, look at the First Amendment as an example. When you think about data privacy, when you think about regulating, when you think about biases and so forth, I mean, that is fundamental and core to the way our judicial and legislative systems are built, right? So it's like if you try to mimic what the EU has done, they fundamentally might value privacy in a very different way than we do.
That's right, like GDPR is so different.
MiFID, all
privacy, right? And the same thing is going to happen. I think the EU just came out with their AI Act. The UK has put out an AI framework. The Financial Stability Board and the International Commission of Securities Regulators are putting forward standards. They're going to be different. Hopefully they'll align, as Chinmoy said, to these principles. But as a business, think about how hard that is to navigate that global.
Because you're in so many different jurisdictions.
Yeah, and that's
right.
That's STP's biggest.
Correct.
One of the biggest issues. STP is a global company, and that's what we look at is the regulations. And you have to go to Asia, Europe, South America, and then the U.S. And everything's changing so rapidly and so quickly. And with AI regulation, we were talking about this earlier as well. Is as soon as you put something in, it's almost irrelevant because it's moving. The tech is moving so fast, and you can't cripple the innovation.
Right.
So it's a fine line of regulation to protect the masses, but also allow for the innovation to kind of progress and figure out who the players are.
This kind of underscores one of the points that we were talking about earlier with the tech stack being too complex, but if we could abstract that to talk broadly about third-party risk, right? Yeah. With the introduction of continuously adding new technology solutions, new third parties into the equation, your ecosystem becomes so complex that you're not only thinking about your own risk and the governance that you need to do of your own data, but the risk of third parties utilizing fourth party AI solutions and further putting your data at risk. So very stringent third-party risk management mechanisms for data governance and how they're handling data privacy before you introduce them to your ecosystem is even more paramount.
It's a great point. But the SEC just came out with a new rule in the past month called Regulation SP Amendments that look to make sure you have good incident response protocols. And one of those is around third-party oversight.
Right.
Is it adequate to meet the risk management objectives around data and data governance?
Yeah, and
but it's a really hard thing though. Third-party regulations are tough to enforce because what happens is companies just pass the liability down the tiers. So that puts the onus on your data governance to cover how do you manage data quality on a continuous basis? How do you not trust anything until you've verified that the quality of that data set is what you expect? And that deals with a lot of the challenges of misaligned models downstream from you.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about it. Your third and fourth party vendors, to your point, Chinmoy, I mean, would they have a data breach, right, or a cybersecurity concern? I mean, it's so interconnected. I guess as a layperson who isn't in InfoSec, it's hard to wrap your head around how to manage all of those different layers, right?
Absolutely.
It's not as easy as calling IT, like hit Control Alt Delete. My computer's not working. I mean, you know, if you're a public company, this becomes a reporting issue too.
That's right. And now it's the SEC has a proposed third-party oversight rule. I don't know if it'll pass with the recent litigation that's happened, but it's a serious third-party oversight to get to your point about third and fourth, levels in the chain, because that could be the weak link. And if that's the weak link, you can have a great program in your own company, but have breaches.
And that auditing and oversight is expensive.
Yeah.
And one of the places where if you're going to cut, you're like, oh, they got it.
But
and I've had that experience with a vendor that got ransomware, and we had issues that came out of it, and it was a long process to come back out of it. But again, the oversight is expensive. It's not a cheap thing to do.
Yeah, and it's hard for our company. We're an early stage company, right? So we can't afford all the infrastructure to look multiple tiers. So it's really and I think this is true for large enterprises. You have to create an infrastructure around data quality and around data management that protects you from that. And it's totally doable today, right? I mean, if you're using data to make decisions, you have to have a framework that says, how do I inspect the data that's coming in to make sure that those inputs make sense? And how do I then look at the insight that came out and make sure that made sense? And then how does that being applied to the decision model, does that all make sense? So you have to be able to look at those three layers of collection, analytics, and decision making.
Right.
That's an excellent point, and I absolutely agree that a lot of companies tend to pass the risk downstream, like you said, to the vendors. One of the things that we're advising a lot of our clients on is similar to cybersecurity response plans and playbooks, having AI incident playbooks as well. So for incidents that may happen related to data governance and privacy outside of your immediate ecosystem, you still are prepared to respond to them.
Yeah, I mean, AI could be a blessing and a curse, can it? Right?
It really can.
Because the bad actors are using the same technology that, it's like a game of cat and mouse, right?
That's probably the scariest thing,
Right.
is we get excited about using this tech, so do the bad actors, right? They're figuring out how, and they're ahead of us, right? I always use the example of a toddler in a playpen has all day to figure out how to get out. These folks have all day to figure out how to put this stuff to work, because we're doing 1,000 other things around putting AI into place. They're just sitting focused, how do I use this to my advantage?
Well, you think about things like credit data. They're buying the same data set that every other legitimate player is buying. So they're coming up with the same answers, which makes it easy to create fakes. So you have to look at data differently. Like, is it the relationships that matter? Does that inform better than looking at the individual data points?
Yeah.
And you're right that it's risk and opportunity.
Right.
Like we typically, our minds go straight to the risk, because AI could do so much harm and damage, whether cybersecurity, privacy, business resilience. But the opportunity, if you have a good governance and risk and control framework, is that it can increase productivity. It can actually improve the effectiveness and efficiency of your risk management programs, right? So how do you balance that to get the best, seize the opportunity, but mitigate the risk?
And we'll leave it on a positive note. Appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.